If you're interested in hearing from one of the world's leading experts on guns, crime, and public policy, a man whose research has shaped national debates and informed policymakers at the highest levels, then we have the guy for you. Dr. John Lott is an economist, president, and founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He previously served as senior advisor for research and statistics at the U.S. Department of Justice in President Trump's first term, and has held positions at some of America's most prestigious universities, including the University of Chicago, Yale, the Wharton School, Stanford, UCLA, and Rice. He also has written 10 books and published more than 100 articles in peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Lott, you've dedicated much of your career to understanding crime and gun policy, Second Amendment rights. Part of your story is that although you are identified with the conservative movement, that was not always the case. Is it true that at one time you were a pretty typical liberal academician?
Well, I was a Democrat anyway, registered.
You were a Democrat?
Yeah.
A registered Democrat?
Right, up until 1993. And, I suppose my views on guns were probably pretty much in the middle of, and I was affected as much as anybody by the media coverage on these things. I'd done a lot of work on crime prior to that, but I had just not been interested in the gun control type issues. Only kind of got into that by accident.
So you were a Democrat. Where were you living at the time?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, a Pennsylvania Democrat. You were involved in academics. You very well educated, and an academician, a teacher, a professor, presumably. It seems like that's kind of the stereotype of academicians that I have in my mind is someone who's well educated, fairly liberal, and probably is either agnostic or for gun control. What kind of sparked your curiosity, or what maybe sort of forced you to have sort of an inquiry, academic inquiry on the gun issue?
Well, I was teaching a class at the Wharton Business School that was mainly dealing with white-collar and corporate crime, and I made the mistake of telling the students that we were ahead in the syllabus. And
that you were ahead in the syllabus.
Right. And so I had a couple of students that came up to me after class, and they said, well, they know it's crime, but it wasn't really on the topic of the class. And they were wondering if I could go and give a lecture on gun control. I said, well, I guess I could do that.
Give a lecture in your class, or
right,
a different location?
In the class.
In the class. A lecture on gun control.
Right.
These were your students asking you to do this.
Right.
Did they have a motive in mind, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think they were just interested in the topic. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, I guess I can. And I'd read some academic papers in the area that were poorly done, but it forced me to go and read through more. And I was pretty shocked by how poorly done the existing research was at the time. They were very small studies. Somebody would pick 31 counties from the United States. I don't know how you pick 31 out of 3,140 counties to go and look at. None of them had tried to account for things like law enforcement impacts on crime rates. And when you're an academic, you do research for one of two reasons. 95% of my work was trying to come up with new ideas that nobody had thought of before. But in this case, it's one of those times where you do it to you think you can do a better job than people had done previously. And I actually got bored about 6 times or so, almost stopped about 6 times while I was going through it. But I finally...
When you were preparing for the lecture?
No, when I did the lecture, I saw how poorly done the existing research was, and that kind of got me to think, well, maybe I should do something on this. And it wasn't my typical paper. My typical paper would be some idea that nobody had thought of before. But this case, you just thought you could do a better job. And so I started working on it, and I got bored, almost stopped about 6 different times, but finally finished the paper a few years later.
So did the paper come after the lecture?
Yeah, paper came after the lecture. And anyway, after I finished it, I got a call from Dennis Cushon, who worked at USA Today. Dennis had gotten to know me a little bit when I was chief economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And he asked me his questions on the article that he was working on. At the end, he said, well, what are you working on? And I said, well, I just finished this paper dealing with gun control. It looked at 13 different types of gun control laws. And he said, well, why don't you send it to him? So I did. And a week later, it was on the front page of USA Today.
Wow.
And then, it kind of, things got going after that.
Bada bing, bada boom, as they say, right?
Couldn't really get away from it after that.
So this happened kind of accidentally. You were challenged by some students. Do you know if they were conservatives or pro Second Amendment people, or?
I don't think they were particularly pro Second Amendment. I just think it was a topic at that time, and they were interested in it, and they figured it was crime, so why not let's learn about it a little bit.
So what was at this time, 1993 is saying there was not much research on the subject of either Second Amendment rights and crime, or guns and crime, or guns
Right.
preventing crime.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't do research on the Second Amendment per se. My research is all public safety. Does gun ownership increase or decrease safety? What types of laws might impact it? And so I was just trying to figure out what made people safer.
And what was the thesis of your first paper?
I looked at all the counties in the United States over, I think it was like 17 years, and literally tried to account for hundreds of different factors that could affect crime, from arrest rates and conviction rates and prison sentence lengths, income and poverty measures, lots of different factors, and many different types of gun control. One thing that a lot of people do is they'll only look at one gun control at a time, but lots of different ones are going on there. And I just wanted to see what impact it had on different crime rates.
Gun control, you mean?
Gun control. And so the only one that I found that produced a benefit was concealed carry laws, and that kind of right to carry laws. And so that's kind of got me starting to work on that.
This would seem to be the beginning of your thesis, more guns, less crime. Is that correct?
That's correct. So that paper that I did ended up getting published in an academic journal, and then the people at the University of Chicago Press, which is a peer-reviewed press, expressed interest and asked me if I would be interested in submitting it to go through the review process that they had there. And so I ended up writing it up as a book, and it came out as More Guns, Less Crime in '98.
Was that your first book?
That was my first book, yeah.
Wow. More Guns, Less Crime.
Right.
Was it a bestseller?
For the University of Chicago Press, it was after their style manual. It was my understanding it was their best-selling book that they've had.
Is that a compelling narrative, do you think, the idea of more guns, less crime?
Well, I think the basic idea is that if you want to reduce crime, you have to make it risky for criminals to commit crime. And you can do that in many ways: higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. But the fact that a would-be victim might be able to go and defend themselves can also reduce crime, make it risky for criminals to commit crime. And, obviously bad things could potentially happen with people having guns, but you could have good things that happen. And so it's a question of just trying to figure out what the net effect is. And one of the things I was surprised by when I was looking at it is that people actually use guns to stop crime about 5 times more frequently each year than they use guns in the commission of crime. But and I'm sure I was affected as much as anybody else by the media coverage. You'd have no clue about that from just watching the news.
When we come back, Dr. John Lott explains when Republicans first began to embrace the idea that more guns can help deter crime and help win elections. Don't go anywhere. The narrative, more guns, less crime, when did that, do you suppose your academic research then gave sort of backing to Republicans in the Congress, maybe Republicans nationally, to be more assertive with regard to gun rights?
Well, all I can say is, I mean, it's kind of hard to figure out causality there. All I can say is things have changed a fair amount over time, just as my views have changed.
How so?
Back in 98 and 99, when you had like Columbine and what have you, one of the things I was arguing about is the dangers of gun-free zones, how they actually serve as magnets for people going and doing the attacks. You know, you have something like, we just had this Minneapolis school shooting that was there. You know, if you read the diary or the manifesto in that case, the killer explicitly talks about learning from other mass murderers on how to pick a target. And he wanted to go to a place where his victims weren't able to defend themselves. You have people who are suicidal, but they want to get media attention. And they know the more people they kill, the more media attention they're going to be able to get. And they know if they go to a place where their victims aren't able to defend themselves, they're going to be more successful in killing people. And in fact, that person explicitly talks about not only picking the target based on that, but even the time of day. He didn't want to go and do the attack in the morning when parents were dropping off kids at school or when they're picking up in the afternoon, because he was worried that one of the parents might have a permanent concealed handgun. So he picked it during the middle of the day at a school that he knew there would be nobody there to stop him. And, you know, you see that time after time after time in these diaries and manifestos. You know, you report this, but the vast majority of the media just absolutely refuses to talk about those parts of their diaries and manifestos.
Why?
You know, I wish I knew. You know, so I used to talk to the editors at Fox News, and I would say, you know, you guys go and have news reports on the type of gun used in the attack or how you think that they got a hold of the gun. Often it turns out that the initial news reports are wrong on those things. But one thing that would be easy to find out is whether or not this person picked another target where people were banned from having guns. And they said, well, John, if you can get us information on that kind of within the news cycle, then we'll include that in the stories. And I put effort in, and I got that information quickly, and I gave it to them. But then they still wouldn't use it. And the explanation that I got was that it would just be political for them to go and include that in the news stories. And I said, well, you know, I don't know why that's any more or less political than going and saying what type of gun or calling it a so-called assault weapon or saying how you think the person got the gun. And, you know, we can confirm this often much more accurately than these other things that often turn out to be wrong. And then, you know, others would just tell me that just even the reporters there just had this mindset and there was not much that they could go and do about it. So I don't know. I mean, and that was Fox. So, I mean, I can't even, I had almost no ability to go and change things for others. What I can say is, like, after the Minneapolis school shooting, the Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed by myself and Congressman Thomas Massey, where we talked about kind of the history on these things and how the media ignores this. So hopefully, you know, getting something in the Wall Street Journal, and I've had God knows how many dozens of op-eds on this previously in other places, will, you know, at least embarrass them a little bit. Because, I mean, it's just amazing. You can find literally many dozens of diaries and manifestos where these killers explicitly explain why they pick the target that they do. It's not random. You know, you look in most states, you'll find only a couple percent of the area is banned for people being able to go and carry guns. But yet, that's where the attacks keep occurring. You know, you have like 92% of the mass public shootings take place in areas where guns are banned. So, you know, you have something like Minnesota, where the Minneapolis school shooting occurred. If you or I carried a gun onto school property, we'd go to jail for 5 years. our lives would be completely destroyed by being a felon and being in jail for 5 years. But take the murderer in that case, assuming the murderer had lived and he died at the scene, but even assuming that, and they usually plan on dying, even if he had lived, he's already going to be facing life sentences for the murders that he committed. He wounded 17 other people that were there. God only knows how many life sentences he would have been sentenced to, 5, 6, 7 life sentences.
So the gun charge doesn't matter to him?
It doesn't matter. You take 5 years from his 8th life, but it doesn't matter. And so what you've done is...
Which is why gun-free zones are silly and gun laws tend to be silly.
Well, in this case, for sure, because all you've done is make it so that the law-abiding citizen will want to obey the law, and the criminal actually has an incentive to disobey it.
But isn't that true with all these gun laws?
It has to do with a lot of them, yeah.
If you, in Washington, D.C., if you don't have a registered gun and you don't go through the process or whatever, and you get caught with a gun, you're going to have a serious charge against you, which will be on your permanent record. There are a lot of lawyers in Washington, D.C.,
right.
And if they have charges like this, they'll
be debarred.
Exactly, their ability to practice their profession. So it's a choice of your safety or the risk of...
Right, and if somebody is going to be committing other crimes, the same point applies. And, the irony is...
The irony is somebody's going to commit a crime and doesn't care.
Yeah, well, it doesn't represent the same penalty, and often the gun charges are dropped by prosecutors. And even more extreme cases, you have people like Alvin Bragg and other Soros prosecutors. Bragg, who's the district attorney for Manhattan in New York, he's refusing to prosecute criminals for firearms-related crimes. So often what makes the difference between a felony aggravated assault and a misdemeanor simple assault is whether a gun is used. But they won't include that in the charges that are there. And so, the irony is they'll go after a law-abiding citizen who breaks the types of laws that you're talking about. But, and that'll often be the only charge that they'll have. But the criminal there who's committing a crime with a gun, they won't include the firearm as part of the charge.
Is that why conservatives don't like gun laws?
Well, I can't speak for conservatives generally, but
is that why Thomas Massey doesn't like gun laws?
Well, I think somebody like Thomas is different than myself in the sense that Thomas, intrinsically strongly believes in the notion of freedom that's there. But I think he also cares about safety. I focus on safety. That's what got me into the debate to begin with. I don't make Second Amendment arguments. And when we ever write anything together, and I think we've written like 22 op-eds together or something, it's always just on the safety issue. And it's what got me into it. And it's my guess is most of the people in the middle of the debate, that's what they care about. A lot of people think they're willing to trade off freedom for safety. I think this is probably one area where they go together.
Coming up, Dr. John Lott breaks down why Democrats' push to ban so-called assault rifles hasn't had a significant impact on reducing gun-related crime. You won't want to miss it. So Democrats make these laws against assault weapons. Are they actually doing any good?
There's been a lot of peer-reviewed research, and I would argue overwhelmingly it finds that it has no beneficial impact. In fact, there is one study, and Biden may reference this quite a bit during his administration, where he was talking about the drop in firearm assaults by this guy named Louis Clarivis, who was at University of Massachusetts at Amherst when he originally did the work. He has his own kind of count and definition of mass public shootings. But even if you take his numbers, if the assault weapons ban explains the drop that's there. What you should see is it should primarily affect assault weapon attacks. So the percentage of attacks involving assault weapons should fall when the ban went into effect and should increase when the ban sunset. In fact, the opposite occurs. When, even using his numbers, when the ban went into effect, the percentage of attacks involving assault weapons went up, and when the ban sunset, it went down, which is inconsistent with the assault weapons ban going and driving any changes. There's lots of reasons why these attacks go up and down from one year to another. But it can't explain, even if you want to take the type of numbers that Biden was using frequently, it can't explain the changes over time.
Speaking of changes over time, we've seen crime rates rise and fall over the decades. What do you think drives those shifts most?
I think it's pretty clear what drives it. It's basically whether it's more costly or not for criminals to go and commit crime. Over the last few years, we've seen real drops in things like arrest rates, particularly in the largest cities that are there. And we had defunding the police that occurred in 2020 and 2021. That had a major impact on the cost of committing crime. Now, there are two measures that we have of crime. And prior to 2020, those measures generally went up and down together. That hasn't been the case since then. These are crimes reported to the police. This is the FBI data that the media generally relies on. And then there's a measure of total crime from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which goes and does a massive survey of about 240,000 people each year to get a measure.
Which is where you used to work.
I used to work at the Department of Justice. Bureau of Justice Statistics, I dealt a lot with them, but I wasn't in that division. And, if you look during the last 4 years, we have data now through 2024, the measure of total crime increased by 59% over 4 years during the Biden administration. That's the largest, by far, percentage increase that we've had in violent crime over any 4-year period since they started collecting this data like 52 years ago.
What was going on?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that were going on, but the main thing was just you had a drop in things like arrest rates that were occurring, a very substantial drop. By 2022, if you look at cities over 1 million in population, the arrest rate for violent crime was down to like 20%.
Does this have to do with cash bail, eliminating cash bail?
Well, cash bail is another issue that causes it. I mean, arrest. Look, do I think if criminals get released as soon as they get arrested, that demoralizes the police and maybe reduces how much they're willing to risk to go and arrest people? Sure. I think it could affect the arrest rate through that. But you find these guys just cycle through the criminal justice system. Like the individual who murdered that woman on the train in Charlotte. He had been arrested like 14 times beforehand. He should have been in jail for multiple offenses. He was released early because of kind of DEI considerations that, racial justice across races. They wanted to, they shortened his sentence for a felony because of his race. And then as soon as he got out, he immediately committed another felony. He should have been in jail for that, but they didn't have, you mentioned cashless bail. They didn't require him to put up bail for that. And so he was released. So there are like 2 crimes he should have still been in prison for when he murdered that young woman. And you just see that time after time across the country. There's a small group of people who commit a huge percentage of the crimes, even among criminals. And things like cashless bail as having pernicious impact on that.
If someone had a gun on that train, do you think that might have prevented the crime?
Well, you never know. Obviously, that train was a gun-free zone. They banned people being able to have guns there. There were people on the train that seemed to see what was happening when it happened. There was a woman right across the aisle, and you could see, she saw the guy and turned around. It was kind of purposely looking the other way. One row back, right behind that woman, there was a man that was there. It looks like from the video that he might have seen what was going on. But also, it's possible that if you had rather than a sign that said this is a gun-free zone, had a sign, that said, people are allowed to carry concealed here, he might have thought differently about going and doing that attack. I can't get into the guy's mind there, but surely he wouldn't have been allowed to walk off the train, likely, the way he was. We just finished a study looking at all the active shooting attacks in the United States over the last 11 years, from 2014 through 2024. And what we found, I thought was very startling. We found that most of the attacks were actually stopped by law-abiding citizens with concealed carry permits, more than police were able to stop.
Can you repeat that?
Civilians with concealed carry permits stopped more of the attacks than police did.
This is according to a study which covered how many years?
From 2014 through 2024, looking at the FBI's definition of active shooting cases. So an active shooting case is an instance where guns fired in public, not part of some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf, anything from one person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting. And what people have to understand is one of the reasons why police aren't able to stop these attacks too much is that being in uniform puts them at a real disadvantage. So if you're going to go and shoot up a place and you see an officer in uniform there, what can you do? You can either wait for the officer to leave the area before you attack, or you can move on to another target yourself. Both of those lessen the odds that a police officer is going to be present when the attack occurs. Plus the fact that, we have like 650,000 police in the United States. Maybe a third at most are on duty at any point in time. So you have like 220,000 for a population of 340 million people. That's hard for them to cover all the possible targets that are there. But what we also found is that even though police stopped fewer of these attacks than concealed carry permit holders, police were 7 times more likely to get killed in the process of these attacks than concealed carry permit holders were. And again, it has to do partly with their uniform. Exactly. So if the killer decides that he's going to attack there, even if a police officer is there, who do you think he takes out first? The one he knows for sure has a gun there, which is the officer. And so, people need to appreciate what an incredibly difficult job the police have in stopping these attacks.
When we return, Dr. John Lott shows how armed civilians stop active shooters 3 times more often than you might think. Find out more when we return. Don't touch that dial. You mentioned your research showing that people with guns have stopped more crimes than police. But I want to ask you about your research showing the FBI has undercounted cases of armed civilians stopping active shooters by a factor of 3. How did you uncover this discrepancy in the statistics?
Well, that's related to this study. When I was at the Department of Justice, one of the tasks that I was asked to look at was the FBI's active shooting reports. And it was pretty obvious to me. So the police departments don't collect this data. What the FBI did was they spent untold millions I don't know, they gave $61 million to Texas State University for a variety of programs. Some portion of that was spent to hire researchers there to go and do new searches, to go and find these cases. And I could tell almost immediately when I was looking at it that I knew attacks involving many people dying that they had missed in the lists that were there. And so I started looking at it at the time, and since then the Crime Prevention Research Center, which I had that you mentioned, we've gone through, we haven't spent millions, we've spent maybe tens of thousands of dollars looking through these cases. And we found two things. One is they've literally missed over that 11 years hundreds of cases.
The FBI.
The FBI. And not only that, but they've misclassified some of the cases. They'll call a concealed carry permit holder a security guard or something. And so over those 11 years, from 2014 through 2024, the FBI says that there's been about 300 total active shooting cases, and 14 of them involved civilians that stopped the attack. I think it's over, and so that's about 4%. I think it's over 200 active shooting cases were stopped by legally armed civilians. And rather than 4%, I think it's like 36%. But beyond that, one of the debates I had with the people at the FBI was that, look, if you're talking about law-abiding citizens stopping the attacks, you can't expect them to stop attacks in gun-free zones where it's illegal for them to carry. You know, presumably they're going to be more likely to obey those laws. And if you separate that out and just look at places that they're legally able to carry, you find, in fact, they stopped over half of the active shooting attacks over that period of time. And the problem is that the missing cases has gotten worse. Over the last 2 years, the FBI claims that there's not one single case in the United States where a concealed carry permit holder stopped an active shooting attack. In 2024, I think 48% of the active shooting attacks were stopped by law-abiding citizens with a permit.
Is there a political bias there, do you suppose? Is that the reason?
Look, you know, it's one thing to miss cases, okay? People can be sloppy, they can miss cases, even spending millions of dollars, they can do that. What concerns me is that when you're told and given, nobody needs to take my word for these cases. They can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, and we list out the cases. We have the underlying documents there so people can go and check to make sure that they meet the FBI definition. Even when I could get the FBI in the past to admit that they've missed something, they still haven't fixed it years later. And so, you know, again, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another thing when somebody points out that you're missing something and you don't fix it. And
which they haven't done.
And which they haven't done. And that, to me, is very concerning. And that to me, would be evidence of bias.
Bias by the FBI, but there's another set of statistics, correct, from the Department of Justice? Is that right?
No, this is the FBI data is the only data on active shooting cases that the Department of Justice puts out. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice.
Seemed like there was another database of crime statistics that you had.
Well, I mean, there's the FBI data on reported crime versus the Bureau of Justice statistic measure of total crime.
That's it, yeah.
That's there. That doesn't break out these active shooting cases, but this is more looking at violent crimes or misdemeanors in the case of the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So this would be like rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults.
So we've been talking about a political bias potentially at the FBI, but I want to ask you about political bias potentially at a place like Twitter, because you were one of the first people to discover that you had been, I don't know what the proper term is, shadow banned or banned altogether, because I think you've written about this. At some point, you noticed that your postings on Twitter just sort of disappeared, or didn't appear. What tipped you off that you were being banned by Twitter, and why were you being banned by Twitter?
A couple different things happened. One
and what year was this?
Oh boy, I'd have to go. I mean, basically, when you had the New Zealand mosque shooting that had occurred, the overall narrative for everybody was that this guy was a right-winger. And I'd read the guy's manifesto, and he was saying things like calling himself a socialist, saying that his ideal form of government was communist China, saying that, he was an environmentalist who hated Muslims because they were having too many children, and he thought having children damaged the environment. He hated businesses. He thought that they were damaging the environment.
So based on what you read in his journal or in his manifesto, he was not a conservative, a right-wing wingnut.
I don't know. Maybe I'm very isolated. Maybe a lot of conservatives think communist China would be like the ideal form of government for us to have. But assuming that that's not the case, it just seemed weird that anybody would call him a conservative. So the thing is, was he anti-Muslim? Yeah, he was. Does that make him a conservative? Apparently not. It made him an environmentalist, and made him, and I tried pointing that out in my Twitter account, and they blocked me.
Twitter blocked you?
Twitter blocked me. They wanted me to apologize for saying those things before, and saying that I was wrong. And I said, wasn't willing to go and do that. And so
because you weren't wrong.
I wasn't wrong. And so I wrote an op-ed in the New York Daily News, which is not exactly a conservative bastion out there, and about being blocked, and then I tweeted that on our Crime Prevention Research Center account. The other one had been on my personal one, and then they blocked that. And so, and all I was just tweeting it out, that I had this article over there. And so anyway, it took a long time. Basically, I eventually, after a while, agreed to take down the post. I didn't put out an apology, though. And but one thing I did notice, so like kind of the shadow banning type thing. So for years, the number of followers I had at Twitter was just fixed constantly at 27,000. Just wouldn't move. No matter what happened, it just couldn't move there. When Elon Musk made his first bid for Twitter, my followers just immediately went up to like 34,000. And then he withdrew his bid that was there, and it went right back down to 27,000. And now that he's taken it over, I'm like at 54,000. So it just, it's just crazy how these things, and it's not just Twitter. Back in 2016. The Crime Prevention Research Center, we were getting, we were doing very well in terms of downloads. We'd get like 400,000 or 500,000 hits a month there. And then all of a sudden, in January 2017, the same time that many other sites like the Daily Caller and others saw their kind of hits fall off, ours fell by like 97%. It's like in one day it just went zap down there, and it's been lower since then all of a sudden. And so I don't know, maybe people all of a sudden in January 2017 lost interest in all these different conservative sites.
Still ahead, Dr. John Lott reveals when he believes conservatives first became the target of censorship on social media and across the internet. Stay with us. was going on there, do you suppose? I mean, was this just because you are a conservative now?
Well, I think it
was because of the issue?
Well, I think because Trump won the 2016 election, I think the people at Google just decided that they were going to put the thumb on the scale to kind of reduce the amount of information that would be coming out that they thought might be on the other side of the political debate.
So it wasn't just Twitter, it was Google as well?
Yeah, all sorts of things. Facebook, others.
And this is just because you are talking about tweeting, writing about issues of guns and people having guns and being safer with guns.
Right. And the Twitter case was explicitly, I mean, I'm sure it was all those for kind of the shadow banning, but, you know, it was just the fact that I was trying to change the narrative on the...
Why is that an offensive narrative? Why should anyone be afraid of that? On
guns are a hot button issue, John.
Why are they a hot button issue, though?
You know, I get often asked that question. And, you know, gun control is probably one of the top couple issues that most divide liberals and conservatives. And the question is, why is that? And I think partly what's going on is it's an issue of who do you trust to make decisions. See, the example I give is something like healthcare. You look at Obamacare, and conservatives say, you know, let's have competing health insurance accounts out there. And, you know, maybe we want to go and provide people with a voucher or something to help cover them, but let them make the decision on what they want to get. If you look at something like Obamacare, you can't determine anything that's covered. Basically, you know, if you're a 70-year-old woman, you're still covered for childbirth, okay? And the only choice you really have between the gold and silver plans or whatever is what's the size of the deductible that you have. And so the thing is, if you don't trust people to make decisions on their own with regard to what their health insurance is going to cover, you know, and therefore the price that you have to pay. My health insurance increased by like 95% right when Obamacare went into effect. What you find is that if people don't trust them for that, how are they going to trust them with weapons? You know, it's like, if I don't trust them to make decisions on what your health insurance, is it surprising that they don't trust individuals to make decisions on carrying a gun around? And so I think that's a lot of what's going on here.
Why did they put that in the Constitution?
Well, you probably need somebody.
I mean, there is no other country on the planet that has a Second Amendment, right?
Right. Well, I mean, there's countries that probably have higher gun possession rates than we have here.
But England doesn't have a Second Amendment.
No, it
so
doesn't.
you can't get a weapon, right? Unless you go through all kinds of rigmarole.
Right.
Or you're a special case.
Well, it's interesting. England had no gun control laws until 1920. None at all. Gun ownership was very common. Violent crime with guns was essentially non-existent. There's an excellent book by a historian, Joyce Lee Malcolm, from Harvard University Press, called Guns and Violence. And in 1900, London, a city of like 8 million people in the greater London area, had 2 gun murders. I can't even get my mind. I mean, no gun control, gun ownership very common, 2 gun murders. They had like 5 armed robberies there. So the reason why they instituted their first gun control in 1920 had nothing to do with crime. What had happened was you just had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and you had a lot of unemployed soldiers who had come home after World War I, and they were worried that they would have their own Bolshevik Revolution, and so they instituted laws that made it very costly and difficult for lower income individuals, even middle income individuals, to go and have guns. You know, the interesting thing is people will often say the UK has a low homicide rate and has strict gun control, so it must be the strict gun control that causes a low homicide rate in the UK. as I just point out, they had an extremely low homicide rate before they had any gun control laws. And in fact, their homicide rates went up after the different gun control laws. It's still lower than what it is in the United States, but it's higher than it used to be. And in fact, every place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns has seen murder rates and violent crime rates go up, which is clearly the opposite, from people who think guns on net are bad there. But anyway.
So why Second Amendment in the Constitution of the United States?
Well, the reason why is we'd just gone through a Revolutionary War. You had kind of the shot heard around the world for Lexington and Concord, where the British troops had tried to confiscate colonial arms and ammunition that was there. And so, they just saw how important gun ownership was and how the government had tried to confiscate the weapons that people had. And so they wanted to make sure people were able to go and protect themselves. And it was more than just, the government. They knew the importance. I mean, you can read the debates at the time for people to be able to go and protect themselves. And one of the things that's interesting is the Second Amendment just applied to the federal government. The 14th Amendment took the Bill of Rights and applied it to the states right after the Civil War. And if anybody goes and reads the legislative debate that occurred on the 14th Amendment in Congress, it was overwhelmingly dealing with the Second Amendment, because what you had in the South after the Civil War were laws being passed by the states there to disarm blacks, to make it so that they couldn't protect themselves against the Klan and others that were there. And so the Republicans that controlled Congress at the time wanted to make sure that that the right to self-defense for individuals was protected against state laws, just as it had been protected against federal laws.
Why does Mr. Trump, why has President Trump zeroed in on crime as an issue?
Well, I mean, if you look at surveys during the election last year, crime was one of the couple top issues that were there. Last year, you would see headline after headline that would say things like crime is falling or violent crime is falling, and people mistakenly think that it's increasing. As we talked about earlier, I think Trump was right on that when he was focusing on that, because there are these two different measures. The rate that crime was reported to police was falling slightly, but total crimes that people were facing were increasing dramatically. We had this 59% increase in total crimes during the last 4 years. And so, the media was insisting on only looking at reported crimes, but only about 40% of violent crimes are reported to police. Only about 30% of property crimes are reported to police. And one of the reasons for this gap is that if people don't think that criminals are going to be caught and punished, that reduces their incentive to go and report crimes to the police. Also, over the last 4 or 5 years, it's become more costly, more difficult to go and report crimes to the police. If you called up 911 6 or 7 years ago, they would send out a police car to your home and they'd take a police report. In many parts of the country now, in part because of the reduction in the number of police in many areas, they'll say, okay, is the criminal still there? And if you say no, which is almost always the case, they'd say, well, you can come down to the police station and you can fill out a police report. Well, there are going to be some people who are going to say, I don't know if I really want to come down and wait in line there to do it. And as long as you have some people who do that, you're going to have some people who previously would have reported a crime who aren't going to do that now.
Very good. Dr. John Lott, president and founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of More Guns, Less Crime, talking about guns, Second Amendment, and crime in America. Sir, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, John. Appreciate it.